Video games have evolved immensely since the day video games have existed. Each game generation that we have gone through, we have seen it evolve with the multiple advancements in technology and being better, making improvements that make the game seem more realistic. But have you ever wondered how they evolved and grown into the graphics we know today? In today's video, we will explore the wonders of video game graphics and take a look at how they evolved. So let's get started. So let's go to the very beginning where video games were starting to become the norm of entertainment and technology. In the beginning, graphics were not very advanced and were really simple back then. The first few games that were released way back in the 1940s, in the early 1940s to be exact, were just merely prototypes, and the resources for making video games were very limited. We would see the beginning of the start of the evolution of graphics. There, we would see a beautiful relationship blossom. As time went on, and games never really gained an audience yet, given the technology at the time, many game companies had to go and have limited resources at the time. There were still some limits on how to make these games visually appealing, as game creators had to cut down on resources and had to resort to using text-based graphics when possible. That is what happened in the early times of gaming. There was not really a like there was not really much computer graphics during the early 40s, early 50s, early 40s into 50s, and that didn't start until like the early 70s or the early 80s. Early 70s to 80s, I would believe. So, I I probably would think that they would have to cut down on many resources given that technology wasn't as bright then than it is now. As video games are starting to become more centralized. When the 80s and 90s came around, there was a massive improvement on how graphics were implemented. It even started having to produce color in their games, given most games were able to produce color back then. Like if you saw Pac-Man, or if you saw one of Sega's games, the racing games, other stuff like that, that made it into the arcades. Arcades are popular back then in the 80s and 90s. In the 80s, in the mid 80s, with the birth of the home consoles, it would become even better because of the advanced hardware that was there at the time to improve the graphics of these games, and what game designers would come to do better, even coming into the upcoming 8-bit era that they were trying to go for at the time with the Nintendo Entertainment System and the Famicom and all these other home consoles that would make it into the 8-bit era. As as many of us gamers have grown to love video games and technology beginning to take a more advanced approach, we as we expanded into the 16-bit era, as we expanded into the 16-bit era of what was to become the 90s and continued with the 8-bit era, with consoles like the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis going on as it is the new hot topic on people's minds in the gaming industry. Many people were talking about this, and the graphics at the time were very visually appealing, and it brought a lot of improvements to what gaming graphics could do and what boundaries could the game creators, the gaming companies that make the games, uh, push to make their games like more visually appealing and stand out from the crowd and give games the edge to be even more successful and expand it into becoming even more sales and more profit into the companies that we see today. But we will just have to see what will go on in the next era.